Right, we're coming to you live from our studios in Johannesburg. Welcome to the Week in Review. It is the program. We review some of the big stories to come out of the week. And of course, as always, what has made headlines and kept South Africans talking. Now, I'm your host, Liesl Wilson. Let's take a look at your headlines. On a somber note, one person has died in a car crash on the N4 between Zeerust and Groot Marico in the Northwest Province. A further 479 COVID-19 related fatalities have been reported in South Africa. And in sport today, as the Lions series decide at Greenpoint Stadium in Cape Town between the Springboks and the British and Irish Lions after a brave fight back into the series by the world champions. Do they have enough to win the all-important series decider? Right now, top story at this hour. Acting Chief Justice Raymond Zondo has sworn in the newly appointed ministers and deputy ministers announced by President Cyril Ramaphosa in his cabinet reshuffle on Thursday evening. Ramaphosa said the changes made to his cabinet were meant to improve the capacity of government, but the Ministry of Water and Sanitation was separated from human settlements, whilst the Ministry of State Security was done away with, and political responsibility for it now lies with the Office of the Presidency. SABC politics reporter Natasha Piri attended the ceremony at the Union Buildings in Pretoria and filed this report.
As well.
A jovial atmosphere as the new ministers and their deputies were sworn in. President Ramaphosa and Acting Chief Justice Zondo took time to share light moments ahead of proceedings. And then it was down to business. First up was Enoch Godongwana taking the oath of office as the new finance minister.
Swear that I will be faithful to the Republic of South Africa.
Godongwana was followed by ministers Mondli Gungubele, who's now the minister in the presidency, and Dr. Joe Phahla as the Minister of Health, as well as the newly minted deputy ministers. Speaking after the ceremony, Minister Phahla committed to meeting the targets for South Africa's COVID-19 vaccination programs. Phahla is not new to the health portfolio, as he has served as a deputy minister since May 2014. In 1994, he was appointed as the MEC of Health in Limpopo under the new democratic dispensation. He says that the department will push to meet the target of vaccinating 300,000 South Africans a day and a minimum of 1 million people a week. Phahla described the resignation of his predecessor, Dr. Zweli Mkhize, as unfortunate and said he and his team would work to restore the image of the health ministry. Mkhize resigned on Thursday amidst allegations of procurement irregularities linked to communication company Digital Vibes.
Well, it was quite an unfortunate development, which we know that has cast a dark cloud on the department. So we will do everything possible in terms of just assuring the public that indeed we're going to do everything by the book in line with all the regulations of procurement and other administrative and management rules.
Minister in the presidency, Mondli Gungubele, who has replaced the late Jackson Mthembu, defended President Ramaphosa's decision to do away with the Ministry of State Security and place the responsibility for intelligence with his office. The agency has for years been embroiled in scandals, with the 2018 high-level review panel finding widespread abuse of the intelligence services and evidence of it being used for political ends and ANC factional battles. The 64-year-old once served as the chairperson of the Portfolio Committee on Social Development and also served as the mayor of Ekurhuleni.
I see nothing wrong in President shifting it into his space so that stabilization of such a sensitive institution is fast-tracked, because that's one institution that can't be found wanting even for a minute. So in that context, I think tactically what the President has done, taking into account the challenges we've been facing recently, I think the President is on course.
The appointment of the new finance minister has not been without controversy. Political parties like the EFF and UDM have been critical of Godongwana's selection. He has chosen to ignore his critics and has vowed to run a tight ship, as he has big shoes to fill with the voluntary exit of Tito Mboweni.
I'm familiar with that. You know, the people who are trying to resuscitate it, I don't know for what purpose. because what I did at the time, not now, what I did at the time, I resigned from government, something which has never happened. And after resigning, I dealt with that matter without tenanting the office. Having dealt with it, I've managed to clear myself.
For now, the new appointees will have to hit the ground running in their various portfolios to ensure that they effectively undertake the tasks bestowed upon them. Natasha Piri, SABC News, Johannesburg.
Well, is President Cyril Ramaphosa trying to centralize power by bringing the State Security Ministry under the presidency? This has been the question asked by some analysts following the new cabinet announcement by the president on Thursday. All the changes come amid the Digital Vibe scandal and the alleged failures of the security agencies to deal with the recent looting and violence. The president announced that the political responsibility for state security will now rest with the presidency. Dr. Sydney Mufamadi has been appointed as the National Security Advisor.
A move deemed by many as bold, intelligence will be housed in the office of the presidency. The minister tasked with overseeing the state security is the new minister in the presidency, Mondli Gungubele, with the help of Pinky Kikana and Zizikota as deputies.
The second change we are making is to do away with the Ministry of State Security and place political responsibility for the state security agency in the presidency. And this is also done by a number of other governments around the world. This is to ensure that the country's domestic and foreign intelligence services more effectively enable the president to exercise his responsibility to safeguard the security and integrity of the nation.
3 weeks ago, the intelligence came under fire for failing to foresee the violent protest that caused havoc in KwaZulu-Natal and Gauteng province. And more chaos followed post the looting as the security cluster ministers appeared to contradict each other in public. Police Minister Bheki Cele denied receiving an intelligence report over the recent riots from the State Security Agency.
I want to repeat here, I've never seen that product. Not I have never seen that product. These products you sign when you receive them.
Now political analyst Dr. Ralph Mateja says it was bold of the president to make changes, especially after the recent violent protest.
You look at the state security as well, a very interesting move that the president is now going to oversee this portfolio directly from within the presidency. This, for me, it shows that the president is aware of the importance of the security cluster and its potential destabilizing effect it has on his presidency.
There were more changes to the security cluster. The Defense Ministry will now be headed by former National Assembly Speaker Thandi Modise. Some say this reshuffle was a forced move.
Cabinet reshufflement this time was informed by the inconsistencies in the security cluster, the passing on of Jackson Mthembu, and also the resignation of the finance minister. And for me, the president, rather than bringing in new people as deputy ministers, it is just the old same people, but given different responsibilities.
The introduction of the Intelligence Ministry first came to birth during the second Democratic administration. The last time this portfolio fell under the presidency was during the tenure of the late President Nelson Mandela. Ntlantla Khatlani, SABC News, Johannesburg.
Right now, for more on this, we are joined by political analyst Dumisani Tembe via telephone. Dumisani, a very good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. I think when we look at the performance of government and these institutional changes which have come under the spotlight, reviewing the nature of the reshuffle to date, what concerns ultimately arise at this juncture?
Thanks, Liz, and good afternoon to the viewers. I think there are several issues. One is that the reshuffling is not necessarily motivated by institutional change. And ironically, I think that should be the case because since the beginning of COVID, there have been some serious gaps in terms of state performance. Now that we went through about 4 days of unrest, to find that suddenly there is a reshuffle. So from my sitting, I think it was more of a knee-jerk reaction, but not motivated by institutional change and the need to get government to perform much better. So it's much more of a political inclination rather than an attempt to get government to perform much better than it has been.
So, in lieu of what you're saying then, when we ultimately look at the consolidation of powers and also government's performance assessments, under the banner of consequent management and other phrases that have been coined to date during this new tenure, how does one quantify this performance and what ultimately is also being reflected in that sense, given the fact that COVID-19 has come upon us unprecedented times, exacerbating some of the more systemic issues?
Look, there are 4 things that establish how, if a government is performing. One is the ability to determine a vision and act in accordance to that vision. Secondly, the operation of government, it needs to be effective, responsive, and timeous. Those are the things that determine whether the state is performing effectively, or not. So if you go back to the Zuma era, there used to be performance assessment contracts, but that were entered into by ministers and the president. But I can tell you at this point in time that there's never been a reshuffle in this country that has been based on performance consideration of a minister. In most cases, it is political consideration. So some of this current, if I were to illustrate that, some of this current reshuffles, for example, if you take Lindiwe Sisulu, for example, who now goes into tourism, it is clear that she has been part of the political contestation for the presidency, and she has not given up on that. And therefore, by removing her from that human settlement position into tourism, she is weakened in that private political draft to challenge for the presidency. If you look at Nosiviwe Ngakula, for example, it was not proper of her politically to contradict the president in the wake of the unrest. So, and if you look into the consolidation of the security cluster within the presidency, it tells you that the president is consolidating his power, but which unfortunately, Lisa, it creates a danger that even those that some of those who are in the other section may be targeted using security, personnel and institutions in the fight for in the factions battles of the ANC. So by and large, Lisa, this country does not have a history of a reshuffle based on non-performance. And in this particular instance, that issue continues to sustain itself under President Cyril Ramaphosa.
Dumisani, let's go back to the issue of factions and the consolidation of power. I mean, when we look at the impact that this reshuffle is going to have on the party factions and also the implications, particularly as we head up to the local government elections and the party elections, hopefully come 2022, what is emerging?
What's emerging is that I think politically, within the politics of the ANC, not necessarily on government performance, within the politics of the ANC, President Ramaphosa has done a masterstroke. He has managed to silence, his faction in a big way. So if you look at it institutionally, AC Magashule has been silenced in a way. If you look at Carl Niehaus, also has been very vocal, he has also been silenced. The incarceration of former President Jacob Zuma, which could be as a result of defying the constitutional order, it has also dealt a serious blow on those that, were, challenging Cyril Ramaphosa. And also removing, Sisulu into the tourism also weakens drastically the opposition faction that deals with President, Cyril Ramaphosa. So politically, he has managed to silence a great deal, to deal seriously with the oppositional faction. But also by consolidating his power through security measures, as we have seen in the latest reshuffle, he has strengthened himself so much further politically. So it's as if this whole issue of a response to reshuffle, to the unrest, it has been extremely useful in terms of consolidating a political power base for the president, far much more than dealing with performance issues of the state.
So then in the same breath, we have to then shine a spotlight on his leadership style to date, particularly during these unprecedented times, and also the timing of this reshuffle then in the grander scheme of things. I mean, when drastic decisions had to be made, he was also still, implementing systems and various processes before making those decisions. So during these unprecedented times, and just given how it has, played out, the inequality, the triple threats of poverty, inequality, and unemployment that continue to grapple the nation at large. What is emerging in terms of his leadership style to date?
Look, his leadership style is one of standing behind governance systems and processes. And it is not one, he doesn't lead like in what I usually call a cowboy tactic, where you jump onto a horse and you start hitting the horse to move. He doesn't do that. So he sits back and allows the systems and processes to move forward. And then at some point when a decision is made, it can't be pinned onto him necessarily. So no one in the ANC can say that he got rid of Esma Khashul or is getting rid of Esma Khashul, because he can pinpoint it to particular processes. And for me, that's the challenge, because I think I'm very sure, Lizzo, that we are living in an era of crisis. When there's a crisis, you apply leadership unusual. The whole combination of COVID-19 environment and also the recent unrest, it tells us that this country is going through a socio-economic crisis. And therefore, the leadership of the country can act as a business as usual. So whilst it is fine for him to consult, he drastically needs to say to his own NEC and his own top six that, the way that governance leadership needs to take place in this country, it has to change, because it's no longer business as usual. It is unusual, and therefore it calls for unconditional leadership. Lisa, that's what Churchill said, that a good crisis must not be let to go to waste. You make use of the crisis to achieve far much more than ordinarily one leader would.
Absolutely. Dumisani Tembe, political analyst, joining us by telephone for his analysis. Again, just on the back of President Cyril Ramaphosa's reshuffle of cabinet that, of course, occurred on Thursday. Again, begging the question, does it address the performance of government on an institutional level? Thank you very much for joining us. While we continue with more news and updates on the other side of this, this is The Week in Review with myself, Liesl Wilson. Do stay tuned. All right, welcome back. This is The Week in Review. We continue with more news at this hour, where one person has died in a car crash on the N4 between Zeerust and Groot Marico in the Northwest Province. A car collided with a minibus taxi. The minibus taxi was reportedly from Botswana and had two occupants, whilst the car who also had two occupants was traveling from the direction of Rustenburg. Now, the driver of the minibus taxi escaped with minor injuries, whilst a passenger was attended to by the paramedics. The passenger of the car also sustained injuries. As we continue to shine the spotlight on COVID-19 pandemic, its impact on South Africa, we have seen, due to the various records that have been revealed, a further 479 COVID-19 related fatalities have been reported within the country. Now, it brings the total to 74,352. The National Institute for Communicable Diseases has reported that 13,652 new coronavirus infections have also been detected. The Western Cape has now recorded 4,128 new coronavirus cases. It's followed closely by the KwaZulu-Natal with 2,673. Gauteng province sits at 2,534 new cases. There's growing criticism over developing nations' intentions to administer booster COVID-19 vaccines, whilst the lower-income countries continue to battle assessing the first dosages at large. Countries like France and the United States of America have already indicated their plans for rolling out additional shots for their citizens. When Africa, less than 2% of the population has been vaccinated. It's a clear indication that the target of vaccinating at least 10% by September will not be reached. The World Health Organization and the Africa Center for Disease Control vehemently oppose the planned booster shots.
The battle of the haves and the have-nots continues. The global health inequality is glaring. The United States plans to start their rollout of booster shots next month. They're targeting those with compromised immune systems. France announced something similar, with their target being the elderly.
Immunocompromised individuals are vulnerable. It is extremely important for us to move to get those individuals their boosters. And we are now working on that and will make that be implemented as quickly as possible.
When we are vaccinated, we develop antibodies. These antibodies allow us to resist the virus, which makes it possible that we don't catch it, or we catch it much less, and we spread it much less, and we almost don't get a serious form of it. And so when we are immunocompromised, or we have certain illnesses, or we are very old and very weak, we lose these much vaunted antibodies. And it is now established that to fight against this virus, we must have boosters. And a third dose will likely be necessary, not for everyone straight away, but in any case for the most vulnerable and the most elderly. This is why we are preparing, like other European countries, to do this third dose for the most elderly and most fragile. And we will do it starting September. So yes, likely a third dose and more for the most elderly and most fragile. At this point, we will take one step at a time.
Vaccine apartheid through hoarding prevails as a thorn in the side of the World Health Organization. Its chief has called for a moratorium on booster shots until the Global South receives adequate doses to protect their own populations.
We need an urgent reversal from the majority of vaccines going to high-income countries to the majority going to low-income countries. Accordingly, WHO is calling for a moratorium on boosters until at least the end of September to enable at least 10% of the population of every country to be vaccinated. To make that happen, we need everyone's cooperation, especially the handful of countries and companies that control the global supply of vaccines.
Another plea to reconsider their intentions and direct vaccines to the Global South.
It's no understatement to say that the course of the pandemic depends on the leadership of the G20 countries. 1 month from now, the G20 health ministers will meet ahead of the G20 summit in October. I call on them to make concrete commitments to support WHO's global vaccination targets. We call on vaccine producers to prioritize COVAX.
The same criticism came from the Africa Center of Disease Director. Dr. John Nkegasong said the delay in the procurement and administration of vaccines has shifted the herd immunity target goals. More than half of African countries are experiencing a third wave of surging COVID-19 infections. Vaccine hesitancy has dropped dramatically, making the need for speedy rollouts even more urgent. Noma Polani, SABC News.
We also saw the reintroduction of the COVID-19 relief grant, which has also brought hope to some struggling Eastern Cape families who have no source of income. Nearly 60% of households in the province depend on these social grants, where a total of 26.7 billion rand has been made available for beneficiaries across the country.
Papa Mafusa from Duncan Village is one of the beneficiaries who are excited about the reintroduction of the COVID-19 relief grant. She has been responsible for looking after her 2 children and younger sister, who is of school-going age since her mother's passing in 2011. The COVID-19 grant helped to ease the burden on her family.
We were dependent on this grant, and after it was suspended, we struggled a lot. We used to buy food and other necessities with it. I'm happy that it's been reintroduced. It's going to make a huge difference.
During the inception of the COVID-19 relief grant, more than 700,000 applications in the Eastern Cape were approved, with more than 100,000 beneficiaries who have not come forward to collect their grants.
This time around, we want to do it slightly different. We want only 5 people per SIM card. The reason being that we have a number of people that we are not able to trace because there were SIM cards that had a number of applicants. When we give responses to them, they were very hard to find.
SASSA says the successful applicants will receive their grant by the end of this month. Lubabalo Tata, SABC News, Eastern Cape.
All right, that's where we leave it for you today. It's been an absolute pleasure as always. Thank you very much for tuning in to the Weekend Review. From myself, Liesl Wilson, and the rest of the team, until next time, it's goodbye for now.